All right, our webinar is now live, and I am pleased to welcome everyone who is here to take part in our event called If I Embarrass You, Tell Your Friends, Jews Making Trouble, Jews Making Comedy. I'm Sarah Abrevaya-Stein, and I'm the director of the Alan D. Leve Center for Jewish Studies at UCLA, and I am very delighted to welcome you to an event that is co-sponsored by our center and by the Mosse Weinstein Center for Jewish Studies at the University of Wisconsin-Madison. And this event has been the magical production of our combined staffs, who we want to thank so much for their work. And just a few words of acknowledgement. We are also pleased at UCLA to be hosting this event as the Natalie Limonic program on Jewish civilization, and also the inaugural event of our Etta and Milton Leve Scholar in Residence. And that current holder of that position, Professor Josh Kun from USC, is taking part in this event. Now, my co-conspirator here has been my colleague and old and dear friend, Tony Michels, who is the George L. Mosse Professor of American Jewish History and the director of the Mosse Weinstein Center for Jewish Studies at the University of Wisconsin-Madison. And Tony has kindly agreed to be the host of this event. So Tony, I turn it to you. I wish you good luck, and I invite everyone taking part to enjoy.
Thank you, Sarah, very much, and to your staff for playing such a crucial role in putting this together. I'm going to start with the introductions. It's my pleasure to start with Jessica Chaffin. We'll go in alphabetical order. Jessica will appear soon on screen. She is was trained at the Upright Citizens Brigade Theater and has gone on to appear in TV and films such as Search Party, Spy, The Heat episodes, in Big Mouth, where she was lucky enough to romance Michaela Watkins. Her new podcast, Ask Rana, with Rana and Brian, where she gives her advice as her longtime character, Rana Glickman, the matriarch of Boston Jewry, it's been keeping her busy throughout this pandemic. I saw Jessica perform in 2006. I still remember it, as part of a duo called Cookies and Cream, and my internal organs have never recovered. She was uproariously funny, unbelievably quick, and full of heart, as she always is, Jessica Chaffin. If you live in the Madison metropolitan area and saw Jena Friedman's show here last year, you know she is one of today's most brilliant political comedians. She is also a writer and a filmmaker who has worked as field producer at The Daily Show with Jon Stewart and has written for The Late Show with David Letterman. Her critically acclaimed stand-up special, American Cunt, is now available on iTunes, and don't miss her special, Soft Focus, with Jena Friedman on Adult Swim. Lynn Harris is founder and CEO of Gold Comedy, the go-to platform for teen girls, young women, non-binary folks who want to be their funniest selves. Lynn is also an award-winning journalist and author of several comic novels and nonfiction books, a creative content strategist, and most recently, and a mostly retired stand-up comic. She co-created Breakup Girl, the only superhero who can save your love life, who has earned a cult following online, in books and live shows, and on an animated series on Oxygen. In her spare time, she is married to Rabbi David Adelson, Dean of the New York campus of Hebrew Union College's Jewish Institute of Religion. And I'll just add that when I recently announced tonight's event on a listserv I subscribed to, it took no more than 20 minutes before I received an email from one of her admirers declaring, and I quote, Lynn to be a God's gift to the world, end quote.
It was not my dad.
No pressure, Lynn. I know of nobody who loves America's robust, multi-ethnic culture, its music, its comedy, its art, its literature, everything more than Josh Kun. Josh is an author, curator, and cultural historian at USC, where he holds the chair in cross-cultural communication and directs the popular music project of the Norman Lear Center. He is an author and editor of several books, including, and these are just a few, Audiotopia, Music, Race in America, The Tide Was Always High, the music of Latin America and Los Angeles, and Double Vision, the photography of George Rodriguez. Josh is also a MacArthur Fellow and winner of a Berlin Prize and an American Book Award. Welcome, Josh. And last but not least, it's my pleasure to introduce the wonderful, soulful Michaela Watkins. If you have ever seen Ariana Huffington or Barbara Walters or Hoda Khattab on television, you could have been watching one of Michaela's spot-on impressions without knowing it. A cast member of Saturday Night Live in 2008, 2009. She has starred in a number of memorable TV roles, such as the Golden Globe nominated show Casual, as well as Catastrophe, Search Party, and Transparent. She can currently be seen starring opposite of Walter Goggins in CBS's comedy The Unicorn. And she is starring in, most recently, alongside Ben Affleck in The Way Back from Warner Brothers. Welcome, Michaela, and welcome everybody to the panel this evening. So I'm going to ask you questions and you're going to talk about them and take them wherever you want to go. And the question that occurred to me first, and I'd love to hear all your perspectives on this, is how do you laugh in these times? The last 4 years have been fairly difficult on multiple levels, political, and with the pandemic and everything that comes with these problems. How do you laugh today? What is funny to you? What makes you laugh? What makes you afraid to laugh, if anything? And I'm going to start with Jessica because she's looking thoughtful with her knuckles under her chin. You're gonna have to turn on your mic.
Sorry, I said I think it's the lighting. I was just noticing that I needed a lower facelift, and so I decided to put my hands under my chin.
Yeah, we offer work.
Which UCLA might have a good program for that. I don't know. But I was just thinking that to me, the things that are funny are the things that make you laugh involuntarily. And so I think that inside of the sort of darkness, and probably in all of our lifetimes, this unprecedented darkness and change in such a short amount of time, maybe 9/11 compares in some way in terms of trying to get back on your feet, in terms of making sense of society and that sort of thing, like the thing that forces you into yourself to figure out what does it all mean? What does humanity mean? But I think that one of the really cool things, and I guess you could compare that as sort of like the light inside of the darkness, is that first moment where you have your first laugh, basically, because you can't help but have it because something tickles you in some way. And so that I speak to as in terms of a person experiencing how important comedy is and how healing it is and what it means to me to see something like that happen. And then I think there's also the other side of it, which is the deep satisfaction of a sort of period of mourning. And that could go for anything in your life, a time like this, a time when things get serious, a time when you lose someone in your life, whatever it is, that moment where you're able to give that gift to someone else. And that is honestly what I think is so cool about humor. And it's a very, not to be like too on brand, but it's a very intrinsically Jewish thing too, I think, which is you're a people who come from experiencing just centuries of adversity, that if you can't find that moment of levity, then I don't know how you survive, what the point of that kind of survival and thriving is, because that's the thing that makes you feel alive. Like laughter, food, sex, maybe, whatever, those couple of things that remind you that you're actually alive. Otherwise, I don't know what we're doing, really. Like, what's it all about?
Jessica, Jena.
Oh, I agree with that. I do think there's something about coming from a culture where we've had so much trauma, and then somehow, what is comedy but tragedy plus time? And so I do think this is a terrifying moment, but it's been worse and it will get worse. And so what makes me laugh, particularly at this moment, in the political comedy space, which I work mostly, is when I see things kind of break through, like everyone's doing similar jokes about Trump because he takes up all the oxygen in the room. But when certain people's projects kind of break through that and push it a little further, that makes me laugh a lot. I worked on a project recently that's coming out on Amazon October 23rd, and it's very funny and interesting. And I think that they did a really good job at like trying to find comedy, and particularly like political comedy in these insane times. Yeah, I don't know.
Michaela, is there anything you can't laugh about now?
Yeah, I can't laugh about everything. Like you ask how I laugh now, I laugh like this. That's how I laugh now. I mean, I watch animal videos. Like that's the only thing that I can really. I saw a thing with a deer and a dog, and they were saying "fuck you" to each other. That made me laugh for about 5 days. But beyond that, you say tragedy plus time. I just don't think there's been enough time. I think we're entering tragedy, and I affirm everything that Jessica said about if you can't laugh, then what is the point? So I think for me, laughter has really been born out of like you said, certain content that rises and pushes through all the noise. I love commentary with friends. I love my friends' take on things, the gallows humor that we have about everything right now. Sort of like every sentence ending with, "Well, the world's going to end, so what does it matter?" But it's absolutely true. I mean, if I didn't laugh a lot this last 2020, I would be a really unhappy person. And I'm fine. I'm okay. I'm lucky. You didn't ask that, but now you know.
But I'm relieved to hear it. Lynn.
Yeah, I think it's interesting that Jessica mentioned September 11th, because I think there's some interesting contrast between how humor emerged or didn't after September 11th versus now. And I was doing stand-up back then. I remember that just not only did everything shut down, but like laughter shut down, comedy shut, like no one did anything. The Onion couldn't publish, like there could be no comedy. And until, for a few weeks after that, I think it was the Onion that did it first. And now there was no pause in comedy. Except there's a pause in the business, right? Obviously, the club shut down, all of that stuff, but there was no moment where anyone was like, "Wait, can we talk about this?" People immediately found the stuff that was funny, and obviously, the stuff that was funny wasn't, people dying. The stuff that was funny, I thought, and now still think, was the stuff that's all about our shared experience. I remember the early SNL bit, like early in the pandemic, with Ego Nwodim putting the markers on her face, doing the makeup tips, showing like how crazy we're all going. And I think there's just real sort of DIY creativity going on that makes me laugh really hard. People in their own houses, getting their own props, doing their own things. And I know it's not great for comics who need to work, on stage to earn money, or on sets when that was all closed down. But to me, it's been kind of like, comedy equals tragedy plus Zoom, and it worked out okay.
I think that's interesting what you said about the shared experience thing, because I think that's why maybe people have been able to get back to jokes a little quicker. But there's been so many waves of what's happened in the last 7 months or whatever. And I have to say, I kind of look at the NBA. I was watching the NBA finals the other day. Maybe that feels like tangential, but I don't actually think it is, which is that those guys had that moment where they had to decide if they were going to do what it is that they do, and they were going to call attention to this thing that really meant a lot to them. And you could totally understand if everybody just decided to stay home And I feel like this totally inspiring thing happened where not only did they step forward and say, we're going to do this because it's going to shine a light on the absurdity and the hypocrisy and the classism and racism and like everything, what's really like this actual moment in our country that's also been cracked open as a result of the pandemic. And that not only them, but then also the league stepping in to say like, and we're going to find a way to make this happen. And it doesn't matter. One really crazy thing I think that's happened in the pandemic is that you realize that this is going to be very controversial, but that money is like made up. So it's sort of like this, it doesn't matter. They can always find the money. So like, just make them spend it, you know, like what's going on with the stimulus, et cetera, but that there's so much allowance for fraud, this, that. But my point is just that the league said, we're going to spend what it takes and we're going to make this thing happen. And it's going to be an important moment for society. And it's going to be personally important to the players in the way that it empowers them. And I think in some ways what you're describing about people doing over Zoom, but also like everyone has to come back to the table at their own pace. When you find it funny or you have something to say, what I don't need is a lot of what's happened during this, which is like everybody's scrambling to try and have a spotlight shined on them. And it's like, yeah, when you have something to say that's actually funny, which goes for during the pandemic or not during the pandemic, I'd love to enjoy it. But there was also a lot of desperation in the beginning of like people wanting to be relevant or be, you know, spotlighted in some way or whatever. But I do think like, on some level, you do what you do. You're a comedian, you're a writer, you're an artist, you're an educator, you're an academic, you're a ball player, whatever it is. And if you can find a way to do that and also make it meaningful in this time, I think that has been like really inspiring on a human level and on a creative level.
I have two questions. I'm just going to lump them together. One is how, you know, so much of comedy is about being irreverent. How can you be irreverent during the accumulated crises of the last 4 years? That's one question. And in other words, is irreverence something that's still permissible? Does it still work? Does it work now? Or does comedy require something else in these moments? The other thing, I forgot. I'll just leave it at that one.
Well, I mean, there are people who are really great at, I mean, who are just really aligned to sort of create content in the moment that really speaks to the moment that we're in right now. And I'm not necessarily somebody who, that's not how I operate. You know, when I write, it's really because I'm kind of trudging up a lot of stuff that is things that I think about and things that are plaguing me. But it comes with, there's just such a real dissonance right now between what is being put in television, you know, like the content that I'm watching versus how I'm actually living. So for example, what I'm watching right now are things like I May Destroy You or The Vow, but it's a world that doesn't reflect the world we live in right now. And so I think when I think in terms of creating content, when I think in terms of creating a show and developing something, I'm really stymied in many ways because I don't know what the world really looks like and how I want and how I want to portray it in a way that is resonant and makes sense, because resonates and makes sense with people, because people aren't going out to restaurants and dinners. Right now I'm shooting a show, The Unicorn, where in this world, you know, COVID doesn't exist. And it's really nice to go there. I'm an actor. I have sense memory. I know how to, you know, it wasn't that long ago that we didn't have COVID as a reality. But in terms of making something new for me, unless I'm doing, you know, a period piece, I want to talk about the world and reflect the world without knowing what the world really looks like. There's a struggle there. It's a little bit complicated. And I am one of those people, maybe that Jessica isn't referring to, that during COVID, I have taken a step back and allowed a lot of people who are really hungry to perform and really need to channel that creative energy into something immediately. and allowing them to say like, okay, I'm using up the airwaves right now, and you can look at my content because I've got something that I need to talk about now. I'm going crazy in my apartment. For me, I was like, this will be a gestational period. I'm just going to take in information. I'm going to absorb. So I think everybody is wired differently creatively. And I think there are so many people who are so wired to perform all the time that they instantly knew how to pivot and take that energy into something else. Where I feel overwhelmed is when I see so much content that things start to not mean anything anymore. What is good content at that point? And I think I'm just trying to be so much more thoughtful about what I'm going to say, because it's crowded, it's cluttery, it's noisy, and unless I'm really moved, I can't, unless I can bring my whole self to something. I kind of going to sit back and take it in.
Who else wants to jump in?
I'll speak to the thing about irreverence in this moment. It's a really scary moment. We're in a culture war that just continues to accelerate and will continue to accelerate as we get closer towards election month. But I think that when you're doing comedy, political comedy, I also think is a misnomer right now, because like the personal is the political, and we're all affected by this current moment. Even if you're working on a show, the fact that you're filming on a COVID safe set, and that you're choosing to film in a pre-COVID time, that's interesting. And the fact that like it all feels like political at the moment. But the point I think I'm trying to make is like anything you say, like, for example, QAnon, all of us could be targets of QAnon at some point because we're Jews. QAnon is like veiled anti-Semitism. We're mostly liberal, I would imagine.
Some of us might be members, Jena.
Some of us are in QAnon. Some of us are Q. One of us is Q. I'm not going to say who.
Tony, for sure.
Tony's Q.
Josh has been pretty quiet.
But just everything that we make is processed now through this machine that whether we want it to be or not. For dumb example, like I've gotten into trouble a little bit recently from like satirical tweets that have been like picked up by mainstream outlets as like not satire. And you try to laugh, but it's also scary, where like reality, in 2015, we were living in reality. Now it's like we're living in this moment as we're slipping into fascism. And when you're like an artist commenting on it, in some ways, the fact that you're commenting is inherently irreverent, because there's so much noise and fake news that if you're just saying something with any grain of truth, you're just irreverent. So for people watching who are like figuring out how to be irreverent, just be truthful and like question things that feel wonky. So I don't think it's harder to be irreverent. I just think it's almost scary to be making anything in this time. And I'm not saying don't. It's just a weird time to be putting stuff out into the world.
But it's amazing how people respond. I mean, I'm very active on Twitter, but politically, I'm not making jokes. I don't find anything super duper funny about politicizing Black Lives Matter or anything. I think it's such a mess out there. So I'm pretty earnest, but there is something about the response on Twitter when you say the most honest thing in that moment and really speak from your heart. And it's so weird that in that kind of a medium that people can smell genuine honesty in that way. Like, it's just, you just see how something like how a tweet will respond, or perform, or whatever you want to call it, that you just thought, I don't even know why I'm writing this, because it's 2 a.m. and I'm really angry, but it's the most like honest thing that's coming out of my body right now. And it's very strange how there's this pulse where I think people really can sense this is I feel like people can smell disingenuousness. Is that a word?
Good enough.
Okay.
Disingenuity.
Disingenuity?
Yeah.
I was going to say that and then I backed away.
Lynn, turn your mic on.
Yes. It's on. Yeah, I think there's nothing. I don't see how it's possible to not be I don't see what there is to be reverent of now. So in terms of I mean, other than good things, you know what I mean. So I taking into account what Jena said, which is that it's not always safe. I don't see any reason to hold back in the places where it can really either bring people together and help them feel that kind of, irreverent humor, whatever it is, can either bring people together and help them feel like they're not absolutely crazy, or if they are, at least they have company. And I think it really, actually, I think that's the main, right now, that's pretty much like, if we can do that, just to help us get through this, I think there's a lot of value there.
Am I allowed to chime in, Tony?
I've been waiting for you.
I wanted to maybe pick up on a thread that's come up across some of the answers, which is the difference between humor and laughter, and specifically political comedy. If we can even draw that line. But I was thinking, as everybody was talking about, right after, in the first few months after the 2016 election, I made it a habit of watching Seth Meyers' Closer Look every night, right? And that was like super healing for the first couple months, like smart, hilarious political jabs at the Trump administration. Gave me great joy before I fell asleep. I could go to bed feeling cleansed and healed. But then those 2 months, 3 months became a year, became 2 years. And then this little alarm bell went off in my head, a little, of what am I laughing at? And, these night after night, making fun of fascism, making fun of a dictator, making fun of extreme power. Kind of, I got worried that it was actually numbing me a little bit, and taking me out, kind of letting me off the hook in some way. And so I don't know. I just wanted to maybe add that to the conversation for you all, which is, that there are certain, I'll laugh at everything from the animal videos to anything that makes me laugh, but I can't laugh at Trump. Especially now that the conversation about him as a stand-up comic is now back on social media as of this morning. People are kind of doing breakdowns of his rallies about how funny he is or how funny he's not. And I just kind of have to just check out from it completely.
But in a way, that conversation about Trump as a stand-up, and I haven't read any of that stuff, but I will admit that there are moments where I will, and I don't ingest a lot of Trump content because I think it's despicable. Not meaning like I don't need to see that, I know what it is. Just meaning it sends me to a really depressed place to think. And also I feel like we're at this place right now where like the undecided voter, like, okay, I mean, like go fuck yourself, like really, like if there are truly undecided people, like I would just prefer you don't vote and get the fuck out of my face at this point. But like the world is so polarized that people have really made their choices. So the idea of looking at something he does and being like, can you believe this guy, is like, yeah, the people that believe this guy, and the people that don't hopefully have a more nuanced understanding of the world. And I don't mean to say that as a like, that makes me feel better to not be engaged kind of thing. But there are moments now and again where I watch him and I'm like, there are moments where he's entertaining, where it's like, and it's like in the same way that I was talking about, like, a joke when you see one or feel one, really, that like, there are moments where you're like, this guy's a lunatic, but he is a showman on some level. And I don't think it's in any way a rehearsed performance. It's more like watching a crazy person on the corner and being like, I can't look away. But I forgot what I was going to say about the beginning of what you said, because it provoked something in me and now I've gone on a tangent. But anyway, I don't know.
I mean, it's like, I love to
I
watch
was going to say that
dance.
it's important. I think one of the things I worry about, and it's like, I feel like I'm at this point now in my life where I'm starting to feel like, shit, did I get old? You know, like, because I'm confused about how people are processing information. And so, and I feel like I've always been 60 years old. So like, I've always just processed things the same way. And now I feel like the world is turning and changing in a certain way. And I think this speaks to something that Michaela was talking about, something Jena was talking about, and something Josh was talking about, but Lynn will throw you in there as well. But the idea that I worry that people's voices are being stifled by not intentionally, but by this moment where like everybody's feelings are so important. And what I don't mean like, oh, everyone's so young and they take everything so seriously. Like, that's not what I'm saying. But the comedians that I responded to growing up were people that just had super distinct voices, who I didn't agree with everything they did, but they were 100% who they were. So like Richard Pryor, Joan Rivers, like those are people that were allowed to have good days and bad days. But because they would express something in a super clear way, in a weird way, you were forced to decide how you felt about it. And so it wasn't this kind of like sheepish, just that's the problem with the Trump stuff, is like, it's just sheep going along with watching without participating. And I do worry that people feel now, and I feel this myself, like in some ways it's great. I'm checking the things that I feel I can say and that I can't say. And then there are things that I'm like, well, fuck it. That's my opinion about something. It's like, if I can't say that and I can't put that out there in this country, and again, I've only been here as long as like, I don't know what it was like during World War II or after World War II or probably in the 20s was probably the last time things kind of felt the way that they feel right now. But like, we're starting to feel those effects of authoritarianism seeping into the culture. And it does feel like that kind of soporific effect of like, your voice gets stifled. And it's coming from both sides. It's not just like from the right, where like, you're told that that idea that in America, freedom of expression is important in the First Amendment, et cetera, et cetera. It's like, it's all starting to feel very hazy and tamped down a little bit. And I don't profess in any way to be like on the forefront of this or have ideas about how to deal with this or whatever. But I do worry that we're like starting to get to this place where like, it's better to not say anything. And that is where authoritarianism comes into me, where like people just decide I could do something or I could not do something and they won't come knocking on my door, whoever they are. And that scares the shit out of me, that stuff.
I don't know if that's new though. I mean, like Lenny Bruce was arrested, Mae West was arrested. People for so long have been arrested in our country or killed elsewhere for saying things, and even right now, like in certain countries all over the world, people are always arrested for saying things. And I think,
of course, all over the world, that's true.
Yeah.
But this is supposed to be the place. And also, this is 2020. We're supposed to be in a moment where people can love whoever they want to love and they can marry whoever they want to marry. And we can be whoever we want to be. And like, everything is fluid. And so I think that's the difference between like a Lenny Bruce and a Mae West, is like the social construct is supposed to be, I mean, if you look at the time, it's not necessarily true, because there's like, the Renaissance was probably more open than the Reformation, like things open up and close down all the time throughout history. And I think we're actually experiencing that in a way, at least for my point in life. I was led to believe that everything like was a progression. And I think 2016 was the thing that was like, taught me,
it's the idea of the arc of the moral,
the clamshell closed. Yeah.
This and then not having, yeah, I totally hear what you're saying. I also think we're in a moment where like we've had such cultural strides in such a short amount of time. If you look at like LGBTQ rights, and there's like this kind of, we're at the same time that we're like evolving culturally and having a more progressive, nuanced understanding of like the person next to us. We're also, because of like neoliberal policies, leaving people in the dust in terms of opportunities and education and whatever. And you can look at how like that could be partly responsible for like this Trump moment. But I think culturally, for all these reasons, also we're online more and we're not talking to each other more. There are algorithms pushing us in certain places to keep us online. And again, not communicate and talk. We're now in a COVID moment where we can't even, like as stand-up comics, like we can't go on stage and have that kind of conversation, even if it's confrontational with your audience or people who accidentally wander into your shows, which happens to me a lot. And so we're pushed into our silos. And I think as a result, people are just more heightened and reactive to what artists with platforms or anyone says. I don't think it's a bad, I think the heightened reaction to what we say as creators is stifling, but I don't necessarily think it's a bad thing. And I don't think it's necessarily worse than it has been. And I can think of examples, for example, if you look at like J.K. Rowling, who's using her platform to just like shit on trans women, or I don't want to say names of brilliant male comedians who talk about cancel culture on their Netflix specials they're getting paid millions to do. So I think that like it's to me on the ground, it feels like more of a talking point than the reality in a historical context of like censorship, if that makes sense.
So we, both of you have mentioned the past, and so now it might be a good time to look backwards and listen to some people who you may consider to be your predecessors. Josh has brought us some clips of comedians from times past, and they might shed light on what you're talking about and give some historical perspective on it. Josh,
yeah, I really thought this was going to be like a Sunday of schmuck jokes, not being so serious here, but that's all right. Here we go. Should we hear Belle Barth?
Yeah, I think Belle Barth's the one to start with.
Does that name mean anything to folks here? Anyway, we'll see. So this is from
He's our
Live.
Attorney General, is what you're saying.
What's that?
The Attorney General, Bill Barth.
Yes.
Oh, that's Bill Barf.
Yeah.
It is now.
That would be his
Bill
garbage.
Barf.
That would be his garbage pail character.
Josh, maybe just spend 30 seconds or 60 seconds telling them who Belle Barth.
R.I.P. Mad Magazine.
Belle Barth was part of a crew of Jewish women comics in the 1960s and early 70s who mostly played late night, 2 a.m., 3 a.m. shows, Miami Beach, Las Vegas. Never got booked on TV, were never on talk shows because they were too dirty. Many of them, Belle, Pearl Williams, and others actually owned their own nightclubs as well. This is a clip just from one of Belle's live LPs from, I want to say 1961, that we can listen to. So this will be the Belle Barth clip.
I'm gonna line 100 men up against the wall. I bet $100 I can bang them all. I banged about 98. I thought my back would break. I went around the corner, got an oyster stew. Came back, banged another 2. I'm gonna win that banging bet. I may bang the other 2 yet. Tomorrow night at the Darktown Strutters Ball, I wish I had strength. Tomorrow night, Darktown Strutters Ball. Belle Barth, she says dirty words in a cute way and everybody digs her the most. Because she's about a booster. She makes flanken. Flanken with kasha vanishkas, with grits. Boston. Pardon me. I had a bunch of buttes from Boston here last night, real squares. One looked at me like this. I said, if I was Paul Revere, I never would have warned you bastards. That's a hell of an opener for a record, I'll tell you that. you're going to be embarrassed, honey. You'll have to leave because here you won't hear the Gettysburg Address, you know. Going to send this record to Tel Aviv. I wanted to know the words to Hava Nagila, but I couldn't find them until I listened to Harry Belafonte. I heard it in Israel. Yeah, I heard a great group called the Foreskins. You're so bashful, you don't like my show, so how come you got a ringside seat? All the ones that don't... I'll interpret for you, honey. I'll interpret. There's only 2 words you have to know anyway in the Yiddish language, and that's gelt and schmuck. Because if a man has no gelt, he is. He is.
We'll probably end it there.
Belle, the incomparable Belle Barth. Who had heard her before, and what are your reactions to her now? I'll just say I play her in one of my classes, and actually I play the clip you started with, which is from this album called "If I Embarrass You, Tell Your Friends," which inspired the title of this panel. But students love her, especially that opening song. What are you? I'm curious to know what your responses are to her. Is it funny? Is it quaint? Is it
Offensive? And I won't have it. I think that's like an alter ego. I think anybody who knows me, if my mom heard this, this, I didn't grow up listening to her. I've never heard her name until today, but I've heard her. Do you know what I mean? Like, she's in my bones. And when I was a kid, I didn't dress up as princesses. And run around in a dress. Somehow we obtained some wig in my house, and I would put it on. It was this brown curly wig, and I would grab a broom and an apron, and I would be I can't remember her name, but like something like Esmeralda, the put upon maid. And I would that was like the character that I enjoyed doing for my family, So it was a lot of banging dishes in the kitchen and complaining and pointing at everybody, and I would go blue. I would go blue. So yeah, that's my feeling about her. What else could I say about her? Where is she?
Mention people getting arrested. Belle Barth was arrested at least, more than once for the dirty jokes. That was recorded in Miami Beach, by the way. That's where she owned her club.
And Lenny Bruce actually opened for her before he was well known.
Yeah, I mean, I think these voices, most Jewish people, especially in comedy, would say that these voices are in our DNA. They've shaped us. They give us permission to do to sort of step outside the boundaries of what women normally do and that are performers, and give it gravitas, give like a history, give almost permission, I would say, to bring our authentic selves to everything. And it's funny because sometimes we just need that permission, like Jessica was saying that she can laugh at Trump when she disassociates herself from who he is, which is a real threat to our well-being. And, I love watching Amy Schumer, and I love watching Dave Chappelle. I wouldn't feel that way if they had a vest on full of dynamite, and at any point they knew they could just like push it and blow up the entire, theater. So there's a safety about that. And I think Jews were not super high status necessarily. And I think there's a real ease with which when Jews perform that they put their audience in, which is, you're not a threat to me. And I feel like because of that, performers like her and Lenny Bruce could get away with so much and felt like they could, and the audiences would eat it up.
But it's also
Actually,
oh, sorry, Lynn, go ahead.
Oh, sorry. I actually had a question, Tony, based on what Michaela was saying, which is, did Belle Barth play to mixed audiences, or did she have like a primarily Jewish following, or what was the scene? Who was listening to her?
Josh would know maybe better, but my sense is that she played to mixed audiences, but predominantly Jewish.
Yeah, she and Pearl would also use a lot of Yiddish, and so there was that moment actually in that clip where you heard someone saying they needed a translator because they didn't get the joke. So it was, I think, mixed, predominantly Jewish, but also really interesting is that she mostly recorded for Laugh Records, which was a predominantly Black comedy label, kind of a really, really dirty. Actually, Richard Pryor did a couple of early records on there, Red Fox. So there's also some really important connections between these women in the 1960s and Black comics. And even that opening song, Darktown Strutter's Ball, old Sheldon Brooks song that, written by a Black songwriter that became a kind of minstrel tune. So like all that link between Blackness and Jewishness and humor, I think is all embedded in there too.
Josh, you mentioned some of the famous Black stand-up comedians who performed Blue. Were Jews and Blacks most likely to do that material? Oh, well, I guess we should take a step back. Most stand-up comedians were Jewish in the 1950s, 60s, into the 70s. The vast majority were Jewish, and there were a lot of Black performers as well. Both performed for Jewish and Black audiences in their separate venues, which might be a reason why there's so many Black and Jewish comedians, because they had venues to perform with audiences that they had an intimate relationship with. Back to my question, were they the ones more likely to perform Blue material?
That's a good question. I don't know if they were more likely per se. I've always been really interested in the women who perform Blue more than the men. I think it's always been much more socially kind of acceptable and conventional for men to be Blue and to perform Blue and to be out late. I mean, the fact that these women, started their careers actually in their 40s, and owned their own clubs and were in most cases divorced at least once, and were on stage at 3 a.m, smoking and telling jokes and drinking, I do think opened up a whole other kind of space of possibility for them, spaces that for a long time were controlled by men, and arguably controlled by white men. In the case of Black comics, one of the things I love about Belle Barth is she used to put in her nightclub, she would put microphones in the urinals in the men's bathroom, so that when men would leave her show to go to the bathroom, she'd make fun of either like how solid their flow was in the bathroom or how weak it was.
Now turn your mic back on. I have another question, Josh. How does Pearl Williams or Belle Barth compare to Moms Mabley and Black women who were around at the same time?
I think similar stories. I think that Pearl and Belle maybe got a little dirtier, often, but it's similar stories. Like you said, that there was a kind of, venues, you could call the Chitlin circuit and the kind of Borscht Belt circuit or the Miami Beach circuit or whatever you want to call it. But these built-in kind of ethnic industrial networks for artists to play on and have guaranteed audiences, however small.
Mm-hmm. Mm-hmm.
I feel like Lynn's been trying to jump in here.
No, I've just been being entertained. No, really, I find it fascinating. I mean, one of the reasons I asked who the audiences were is that there's such a, the jokes about when you can just say a Yiddish word and it's funny, which I don't agree with. The idea that just saying, that, the idea that like Yiddish is a whimsical language, it cracks us all up, is to me completely not funny. And so I'm not judging Belle Barth, different time, different place, but that's why I was wondering, like, was it other Jews saying, was it other Jews responding to sort of shticky Jewishness, or was it non-Jews, or both? And no judgment. I was just curious. It's all very interesting.
You mentioned Yiddish. So an article came out in Esquire magazine not long after her album came out, called "The Yiddishization of American Humor." This is in the early 60s. And I can't remember the exact number, but the author said there's something now like 75 Yiddish words in circulation in the English language because of Jewish comics who were appearing on late night in the clubs that Josh mentioned, but also on late night talk shows, which was still a pretty new thing in the 50s and 60s.
Yeah. Yeah. I mean, just like using Yiddish is one thing, but I think there has been a lot of lazy humor about just like saying a word that sounds funny because it has a shn sound or something, is something that I've always not responded well to, just because the idea of like, it's not a funny language, it's a language. So anyway, but can they really say for sure that like that Yiddish came from comics as opposed to just Jews in the culture?
Well, it's probably exaggerated. I mean, I think 75 words is probably an exaggeration, but it made a point. I mean, it made, I think, a valid point, and that is that the 50s and 60s at the time when Jewish comedians were really making a big push from the Borscht Belt or Miami Beach into the homes of millions of Americans.
Yeah.
And most of these names are forgotten today. Some are remembered, but most were popular in their own time and then just vanished.
But that vanishing thing is really interesting to me because it speaks to who's allowed to be at the table. And I think that that's a real moment, like as for women and for comedians, like, or woman and as a female Jewish comedian. So like Jewish comedians, female or not, there's always like one or two that break through and then they're accepted as kind of mainstream. And then people are sort of, the afterthought is that they're Jewish, even if that they came up that way, because then the material becomes for everybody as opposed to this niche thing that it was. And I have to say the whole conversation about women in comedy, which I think is an important one, I always think it's weird, like when people talk about being trailblazers now, like people that are contemporaries living now, talk about being trailblazers as a female comedian or blah, blah, blah. And you're like, all of that history just vanishes because at the end of the day, the thing that's sort of both cool and inspiring to listen to something like that clip, but also like innately depressing, is the idea that those groups, Black and Jewish, and I think Black comedians have been much more successful at breaking into the mainstream. Maybe that's crazy. I don't know. I haven't given that a lot of consideration, but I just mean as a niche, as a movement, kind of like there are always, certainly Black people are disenfranchised and, left out of the process in so many ways. But as entertainers, there's usually like some of our greatest entertainers are always, at least in this country, Black entertainers, whether they're comedians or musicians or whatever. And part of that is what's fascinating about like how totally not representative that is about the way they're treated overall in the culture. Like that is part of the problem, is the way those things don't come together. But so I apologize if that is not stated eloquently, because it's not something I was planning on saying, but I think it's interesting that these things vanish to the sands of time. And it's like, it's almost this Sisyphusian thing where like you climb 3/4 of the way up the hill and you can only do so much in a lifetime, and then it's over and you have to wait for like another woman to hopefully like find you at the top of Everest and like take your flag to like the next level until they get to the top. And I think that says everything about what people are willing to accept. People in power are willing to accept from Jews, from women. I used to think, oh, I'm just funny and it has nothing to do with like, maybe I'm funny. Maybe part of why I'm funny is that I'm a woman, or part of why I'm funny is that I'm Jewish, but it has nothing to do with who I am as an individual. And I think as you do this longer and longer, you realize that there are forces at play that do limit the sliver of the pie that they'll give to those groups, whether it's Jewish, Black, female, whatever. And I'm
Jessica,
sure
let me
1,000 other groups. But
I'm going to interrupt you so you can elaborate on the point you just made. No, turn your mic back on. So you can elaborate on the point you just made. Really struck me. You said there are larger forces at play that shape who you are and what you do. What are those forces as you see them? I'm not asking for a sociological analysis. I'm asking for you, when you think about.
I didn't ever think that they shaped who I was and what I did. I think in a very American kind of way, I always thought your voice is individual and you can do what you want, and however far you get in this world is based on how hard you work or how hard you try, or et cetera. And I think that what you realize when you get a little closer to that rarefied air is that there are just fewer opportunities. Like there can be one great Black comedian and one great female comedian and one great, and then, Jena made a joke about people in their Netflix specials making millions, but about, I don't want to put words in your mouth, but about basically middle-aged white guys in their comedy specials. And it's like, there's always going to be 20 of them for one of you. There's never going to be 20 of you. And so it's also part of why people talk about like people not necessarily helping each other up. And I think it's because people know there's like really only room for one at the table. And I never believed any of that really as I was coming up. And I think I see it more clearly now. Not meaning like, oh, I'll never get to where I want to be because the world is a certain way, but just meaning like, oh, there is a reality to that. People walk into a store. If you're a person of color and you walk into a store, you feel a certain way that's different than the way that maybe I feel when I walk into a store. And that's real. That's not, oh, Tony, your timer went out. But I think that stuff is
Tony,
real.
wave your hand in the air. There you go.
Yeah.
I don't know if that makes any sense.
Like you just don't care.
But you're, as a comedian in particular, your voice is so individual and it's so important. The things I'm saying are kind of contradictory. It's so important. Like if there's anybody who's watching this who wants to be a comedian or a writer or whatever, or an artist in any way, and is taking something away from this, it's like your voice, that is the only thing you have. So that's the only thing you can develop. The rest of it is like, if you really want to cut through. And so that's one piece of advice. And the other piece of advice is like, there will always be pressure for you to not do that thing. And so you have to really have like a lot of fortitude about it. If that, I don't know if that made any sense at all. But.
I actually have a follow-up question for everybody on that, which is when I was researching Belle Barth and Pearl Williams, the first place I went, I told Tony this, was to the Paley Center when it existed in Beverly Hills to look for any footage of them that I could find. And when I went, the archivist said, we don't have any footage of them because they were too dirty. They never appeared on TV. But you should know you're only the second person who's ever come in asking for it. And I said, well, who was the first? And they said Bette Midler. So the question is, with that vanishing that you were referencing, like how much research did you all do in your own work? Like are there moments in your careers that you've gone back and said, I want to dig up some of this history that might be in your DNA already? But like, is there a kind of research process at all for folks?
I got into comedy by like studying it in college. I wrote a thesis on comedy, but I think, so I did get into it from a research perspective, but I think a point that we're kind of, Jessica touched on and you touched on it as well, that I think is really important to consider is just like the erasure of female voices throughout history. And when you asked if we had heard of Belle, it was kind of like, oh, like a funny woman I've never heard of, like so rare. But I think that, and the fact that like Bette Midler was the one who asked for her, and the fact that like who makes the archives, another example in popular culture that happened in the past few months was the Watchmen and the episode on the Tulsa massacre. And just like, not to bring it down to not comedy, but just like the importance of history, whether we're talking about female comics. And I still can't get over the fact that she put a microphone in the urinals in the men's bathrooms, like a woman club owner who shamed men from walking out of the room. Because what happens, I remember like when I first started doing stand-up, whenever they would announce a woman, and this is not like a female-owned club, the whole front row would just clear to get drinks. So the fact that she like owning the club and having the power took it into her own hands to be like, if you're going to get up because you don't think what I have to say is relevant, I'm going to shame you in a kind of lighthearted comedic way that's also a violation. I'll never forget that. So it was good to know. But just the idea that like we can learn so much from history and comedy and in other respects. And when that is erased, it does such a disservice to like our generation of female comedians, the ones that came before us. I think we're all better the more we study and look at prior comedians. Like when I first started doing comedy, I didn't really do Jewish humor because there was such a lineage of brilliant Jewish comedians who had already done that. So it kind of forced me in a really healthy way to figure out what my voice was, or whatever you want to call it. So yeah, to your question about like, have we done research? I mean, we've all done research just being out at the shows, watching other shows, watching our peers, digging up old comedians and watching their acts. But the research, I mean, one of my, like Bill Hicks, it's a cliche, but he's one of my favorite comedians, as is George Carlin, as is Sarah Silverman. But when you get into the archives of like political female Jewish comedians, there were so many, and I don't know who they are because they weren't the ones writing the history or archiving the history. And so that's the thing that I think we all need to be cognizant of, you know, like there are a lot of themes that are kind of reconnecting to Jessica's point about like thinking like, I think naively before Trump was installed by Putin or whatever, tomato, however you want to talk about that election. Like our idea that the arc of the moral universe is long, but it bends towards justice. And then that event happening and being like, oh shit, no, it doesn't. We have to just like consistently be engaging with our past and reconciling it. And like, as artists and creators putting out stuff that is reflective of it. One other thing that came to mind, I remember I saw like a public access talk show with Meryl Marco, who's one of my comedy heroes. She like co-created Late Night with David Letterman, and she's a brilliant comedian who has a book out. You should all buy it. But I remember her sitting at a couch and somebody asked her like, are women funny? Or like, do you think women can be pretty and funny? It was some dumb gaslighting question that she was asked in like 1983 or something, that like, and then all of us who've come up, like, I think we've settled it now, but there was like a time from like 2005 to 2010 where we were all asked like, are women funny? And do you think women can, and it was just such bonkers questioning, and to see it in 1983 and then to experience it in 2005 and to realize like, this keeps happening because we just keep forgetting our past. It was enlightening as it was frustrating.
So there's a TV show that's brought your past to the screen, The Marvelous Mrs. Maisel. Oh, you're shaking. I see a shaking of head and a scrunching of face.
Don't quote me. Good thing we're not taped. No, it's fine, but you know.
Someone's got to weigh in.
Well, my whole business is about getting women into girls and women into comedy to you know help correct all the wrongs that Jena just eloquently and depressingly described. And so like my whole business is women in comedy, right? And so and this is like no shade on the show, but it's just proof that there's like just not enough like stuff in the world about women in comedy or something, or that women in comedy are still not normal, because like the number of people, if I had a nickel for every person who said, oh, you do stuff with women in comedy, there's this show you have to see, you know, as if the only two things in the world, or the only one thing in the world is that show, that is at all relevant to me, you know. And you know, my husband was joking. He's like that's like saying, you're a cheetah, have you seen Tiger King? You know, it's like related but not the same. And like, I don't know. Anyway, I just everyone, it just shows that there's a dearth of examples and normalness of women in comedy, that people think that's the only thing. And it's like people thinking that there's enough women in comedy because they know two really famous female comedians and they're both named Amy. You know, like it's not. So, you know, I think it's a very cute and very funny show. I don't think it's really necessarily about comedy, but it's well written and enjoyable. But I think it's a slice of life show that is like probably very unrealistic. And also, I will watch anything with Jane Lynch. So you know, that's part of it. I also do think, I have nothing against the actor who plays her, but I think she's lovely. But I also, I will never, you know, much as Jena will never forget the urinal thing, I will never understand they couldn't find a Jew. Like there was not one. Like she was like I like the actor. I really do. It's nothing against her, but like there was no one. She was the one. She was the one. There was no one.
Busy.
Yeah, exactly.
Michaela is
I mean, I'm
very
looking at
busy,
Michaela
Lynn.
There are
I'm
very
looking
few
at you and I'm
things.
saying this.
Well, there are very few things that have made me wish I was younger.
Casual was shooting at the same time. I mean, Lynn, I don't know what it is that what kind of answer you
No,
like.
but really, there are very few things that have made me envious and or wish I was younger. You know what I mean? Like I'm pretty okay. I'm like you. My friend used to describe me as like a 70-year-old in a hot girl's body, and so I was, in my 30s. She said that. She didn't say it lately. Weird.
Excuse
Anyway,
me. I think we know that it holds up.
I'd like to show you my body now. So I think that it's funny because when that show came out, I was like, fuck, man, if I was like 10 years younger, I really hope they would have given me this job because I would have absolutely loved it. Absolutely loved it. And then I had this thought, which is I think I'm not alone in Jewish lady thought, but I was like, oh, I see why they would cast someone like her who's non-Jewish, who can play Jewish-ish, because like it's more palatable with her blue eyes and her, like bone structure. And so
That's really funny, actually. It's like, do you really want a Jewish comedian? Do you really want a Jewish actress?
We want a Jewish.
A troll will show up with like a pink ribbon in her hair and like monster her way, eat her way through the set, and you'll be like, this is not really what
I get
I
it.
have a question for Lynn or anyone else about the character. How do you think a Jew might play that character differently?
A friend of mine was like,
with worse posture, I would say.
Bigger nose.
Bigger tits, a little more around the middle, maybe. I don't know. I can't be sure on that, but yeah.
Yeah, I think a little more klutzy. And but I was going to say, we talk about, did you do your research, Josh? You asked, and I always think, because everybody, along with our women funny nightmare question, is always like, who are your heroes? And I just don't hear people ask male comedians like, who are your heroes? And because it's just so in the ether. So I always wonder, because I would always say like Gilda Radner and Carol Burnett, and then I really thought about it just now. Did I gravitate to them because I was like, oh my God, they're so funny? Or did I gravitate to them because I saw people laugh, my parents laugh at them? And I thought, oh, that makes people laugh. Therefore, I'm going to study that. I'm going to understand that. And I did. I understood what they were doing. I understood how that could translate into making people laugh. But I had to find my own voice. And so, no, to be totally honest with you, I haven't been that interested in doing the research on who came before. Am I tickled? Am I delighted when I hear someone like you just played? Or, the first time that I heard Nichols and May, I was like, who is she? Now that's a trailblazer. But I didn't listen to her and then go, that's who I want to be. It was like, I did my own thing and I was like, discovered her and thought, oh my God, she's amazing. I don't think that informed what I would do later on. So
I also think that's a transgression as a comedian, like at least in my opinion. And I have always known you to be a similar type of comedian, which is that what you do, you want to be authentic and your own voice in something you wrote, and you don't ever want to feel that you're cribbing from somebody.
Yeah,
so the idea that you would go deep and model yourself on someone is anathema to who you are. But whatever, it's more about like everything else in this world, which is like, what's the music you listen to growing up? What's the comedy you watch growing up? Like what got into your bones? And like your brain filters that stuff out. So it's like, I would never go back, and not because they're not amazing. And it makes me sad now that I don't know more about these women, but like, I wouldn't ever want to feel that I was stealing their joke or their voice when I'm trying to develop my own.
And when you come up as an actor, which I did, and then transitioned into comedy, theater actor, you do study the people who came before you, very much so. You're constantly picking them apart. For me, I don't know. This doesn't matter. Go ahead. What do you want to say,
I want to
Tony?
go
You
back to
look hungry.
Lynn's question because there is so much.
He wants to know if he should take the jacket off or keep it on at this point.
I'm definitely going to take it off. But I also want to know is, I mean, there's so much conversation and disagreement about blind casting today. And your question, your point essentially is about that in the Jewish incident. So
I think
I want either Jena or Lynn to comment on how, besides blue eyes, and which is important, I mean, besides her appearance, which is actually very important to the question of casting a Jew. Beyond that, how would a Jew play that role differently? I have my own thoughts about it, but I'd love to hear what you think.
I think my crinkled nose was just because a friend of mine was like in the final round of getting it, and she's a very funny Jewish comedian, and she didn't get it. And I think this is a moment in Hollywood where there is a lot. I mean, there's so much the Gal Gadot playing Cleopatra is the most recent thing in the news. And it's so interesting, these conversations, because on the one hand, that could be like anti-Semitism, the reaction to her playing Cleopatra. I don't know how to pronounce it. But then on the other hand, like, why didn't they get like a woman from where, was she like from ancient Greek? I don't know. But you also see it in like ScarJo playing a character.
But go back to my question, because the clock's ticking. I want to know
I'm sorry.
How a Jewish woman would play that part differently.
That's such a weird question, Tony. I'm so sorry, but like I don't totally understand the question, because it suggests that women who are Jewish have different acting chops than non-Jewish women. Yeah. I think that women does
to people that are artists and great artists, like just like what Jena was just saying, like this Gal Gadot shit is bullshit. It's like, I don't know, is she the best? Who cares? It was Liz Taylor. It was this one. It was that one. It's like, are they the person for the part in the moment? To me, it's more like, did you get a good actor? Because that's how I feel anyway. And like, yes, we can have that conversation where straight men play gay characters and waspy women play Jewish women. And like, there's always this great imbalance in these things. It'd be nice if they dug a little deeper. But I don't know, like, why shouldn't Gal Gadot get
Wait, Jena, what were you going to say though?
I was going to say though, that like in this kind of reckoning of everything right now, like when we are casting, there are enough people who are from where the character is from. I think it's always been an excuse of like, we're casting this white guy to play a trans actor. I mean, part of it is like, Jared Leto can make money at the box office, but it's like, it's cool when people step outside of prior models to actually take risks. And I don't even think.
I agree. But then again, look at Transparent. I wouldn't touch that casting of Catherine Hahn, of Amy Landecker, of Gabby Hoffman. None of them are Jewish, by the way. And I thought that they played it so authentically. So if you say like, how would a Jewish woman play it differently? I would say the only difference that I think is that the musicality to that kind of character is in our bones. It's in our DNA. It's in our epigenetics. Mm-hmm. I think it's like we hear that music, and comedy is music. And so I think the only thing you're just changing is a little bit of the tone. But, she's a very capable, wonderful actress. Because I knew she wasn't Jewish, my first thought is she playing at something? And I think probably when the show first started, she might have been playing at an idea of what a Jewish person would do. But once she sat in it and she was in it for a while, much like the people in like I was saying in Transparent, like it became who they are. And then I don't know, like, is there much of a difference? Everybody makes everything their own eventually anyway. So at that point, I think it's kind of a wash.
That's, I think, so beautifully expressed, but also the point about like, I mean, I think it's more about the process. And so in a weird way, being outside of the business, like this idea of casting is different than what the reality of the thing is. And the reality of the thing is like, however many actors or actresses are put in front of the producers, and those are the performances they evaluate. And then they go after people for various reasons, whether they're a name, whether they only care if they're talented, whether the studio will let them, whether the network will let them. Like there's all these levels these sort of institutional levels to the way it happens, as opposed to this simple, like, they should have got somebody else, you know, which is how I feel still when I watch TV, where I'm like, what they get her for? And then I can go into my brain and catalog like why they got her. But I do think there is something to be said aside from this, and I don't put myself in this category as an actor, but like for actors that are true artists and chameleons and feel that they are living in the body and the experience of another character. And I don't know whether Rachel Brosnahan feels that way about her. I don't know anything about that. I'm just saying that you have to leave room for like artists to do their art on some level also. And so it's overt. I would love to think the process was they evaluated 12 Jewish actresses and 2 non-Jewish actresses, and they chose, you know, like, and then the one that rose to the top was this one. My guess is that's not what happened, but you have to leave room for people to still do their craft. And as people, this is kind of the thing I was saying about like the trend and society versus the individual. And like, you still have to feel that you have some agency over your life as an artist, and that you can push for those things, whether you come from the most rarefied place in the world and you choose to live in the stories of people that didn't grow up the way that you did, or the reverse. And so I do think there has to be room for that kind of thing.
I agree. Tony, I'll keep this quick. I agree. I do also think that like white is the default, and we could, as people who cast and direct and all this stuff, kind of step outwards if we're, or like, if, you know, if they're put pressure on the people who are in power to maybe like try to step outside of the model of whiteness. But there's also a separate conversation, I know we don't have time for, that I think is equally interesting, about like Ashkenazi Jews and our ability to assimilate into the, you know, white supremacist culture that has allowed us to be successful and makes, I don't feel bad that, I think Rachel Brosnahan's a brilliant actress and does that character perfectly. I think I'm just sad for my friend who was so close to getting it. But I think when you look at other like white people playing other minorities, it feels a little bit more I hate the phrase problematic, but it does. But yeah, I don't know. I think there's a balance of all things. I think it would have been cool, but it doesn't bother me as much as if it was like a white woman playing an Asian woman. That weirds me out.
And then I wonder, like, would it have the audience it had if it had like a little Jewish frizzy-haired lady playing that part?
But then you look at
If
like,
it wouldn't become suddenly niche.
then you look at like early Joan Rivers stuff, and it is this kind of embodiment of the moment of that like post-war moment of like the hair is straightened and the, you know, like, it is interesting. Like that was part of what it meant to be a Jew in kind of post-war America also, is like assimilation is a big part of that. So it's like, I don't know if it's such a, like, I don't know the way that flows, you know, what stage you ascend to when you finally become a WASP, but that you're finally like honored by being played by a WASP actress. Like, I don't know whether that's in some way like a tribute to the journey of the story, but anyway.
Everybody.
Someday, I'll get there someday. Gwyneth Paltrow though is a half anyway, so it's like that's, you know, that's about passing. I'll pass.
That's a fun parlor game. What wasp do you want to play you?
Julie Christie.
I don't see you passing anytime soon, Jessica, and that's a compliment. Everybody, thank you so much for your comments and the conversation. It was illuminating and really enjoyable. And thank you to the audience out there who we can't see.
I did get a question from the audience, by the way. Somebody just texted me. Jena, who is your friend that almost got the role?
Name. She has other projects. I don't want to like bring her to it, but she's so great. And
is there anything we've loved her in?
I know. Is it Jenny Slate?
It's not. Perfect.
Maybe you should lead us out with another clip.
Another clip. Okay, let's see.
You could lead us out with the clip.
Why don't we do, this is May Castell doing Mrs. Portnoy's retort, where she is the mother of Portnoy from Portnoy's Complaint. And also she was the voice of Betty Boop.
And now, everybody, please come a little closer. Because what I've got to say, I wish to God I didn't have to say it all. A little closer. But since 97% of that book is devoted to the topic, the choice is no longer mine. The topic is a certain activity done by non-religious boys. It begins with an M and it ends in a mental hospital. Of course, when I read it, I don't have to tell you, I was shocked. I asked him, "Is this what you went to college for? To write about such things?" And he said to me, "Mom, didn't you tell me that to get ahead in this world, a boy needs pull?" Now I ask you, is that an answer? Is that a way to talk to a mother? Oy vey. Besides, he don't remember right. I was very liberal. I told him plenty of times to go right ahead and do his thing. I told him Dr. Yitzel says it's normal, nothing to worry about. Only in one case out of two does it fall off by itself.